Okay, in the last video for dry cooking methods, we are working on dry cooking with oil. So we talked about the dry cooking methods that just use a little bit of oil. And these next cooking methods are going to use a lot more oil. So we're going to go with pan frying first. So pan frying uses a lot less heat and a lot more oil. And so by pulling the heat down, that also means that we can use different types of oils. And so we can use oils that don't necessarily have a high smoke point. And so for pan frying, like I like to use something like Crisco, or even put up some coconut oil in something that's going to be pan fried. Sometimes I'll do a mix or a blend of a higher temperature cooking oil with something like coconut oil or a little pinch of sesame oil or something to give it some flavor. Bacon grease, a little bit of that in there is good. And so in this one, we're cooking in oil. The food is going to be cooking in more oil, but not completely covered in oil. In Generally speaking, the food is coated with either a batter or dredge. And I'm going to cover the difference between battering and dredging. There's a little bit different, but essentially there's something on the outside of the food, and that protects the food from the oil, and it also imparts some flavor in there as well. So, and generally it gets all golden brown and delicious and really good. So the best example of pan frying is this picture here, which is fried chicken. And I hate to even talk about how much I absolutely adore fried chicken, but it is really, really good. So for deep frying is different. In deep frying, the food item is going to be completely immersed in the hot fat. And so the food is kind of swimming around in the deep frying. Again, it's almost always going to be breaded or battered. And you're going to end up with kind of a crispy coating, and the interior should be moist and tender if you've done it correctly. So here's the difference here between the battering and then the breading or dredging. So batter, everything's in one bowl, and you dip your food item into that bowl. And so you mix your wet and your dry ingredients. So a lot of times it's going to be flour, or it's going to be cornmeal, and you mix your liquid, and the liquid could be beer or milk or water. And then you may or may not have a binder of an egg. I will say you may hear about the term beer battered, and that's what that kind of means. And so beer battered is flour and cheap yellow beer, and it really does. And you just mix enough liquid to the flour to make it kind of thick, like really thick pancake batter, and then dip your food item in there. There's also tempura battering, which is really common in Asian cooking. So if you've ever gone if you're one of those people that like sweet and sour chicken, then those little bits of chicken have been coated with that tempura style batter. Breading, on the other hand, or dredging, is when you do the same thing. And so your food item is going to be coated, but they're all in different bowls. And so you dip the item into a wet ingredient first, and then you dip it into the dry ingredient. Sometimes you even go back to the wet and then back to the dry a little bit, but essentially wet and dry are kept separate. So for deep frying, you want to make sure, again, naturally tender things. And so the things need to be small in size and shape because they need to be able to cook really quickly. They get a pretty good amount of flavor from oil, so it's important that your oil is clean. It's important that means that you haven't used oil in a deep fryer that has like nasty food particles that continuously build up and get burnt, that your oil hasn't gotten really hot. If your oil has hit that smoke point and kind of broken down, then it's not going to be good. And old oil is going to go rancid pretty quickly. And that's just nasty. So you want to make sure that your oil is clean and it's filtered and it's good quality oil, and it's the right temperature for the deep frying as well. Vocabulary term here for the deep frying is float, and that's exactly what it means. So that is sometimes used as an indicator that foods can be done. Depending on the food items, you may still want to use a thermometer or something like that. But essentially, food items rise to the top. At that point, the crust should be golden brown. It should be crisp and delicate, but you do want to check that internal temperature, particularly for a meat item. So the swimming method is when you just drop a food item into the hot oil. It kind of floats around on the bottom, and when it's done, it swims to the surface. Sometimes it'll swim to the surface, but you still need to flip it over so that it cooks on both sides. And one of the best examples of the swimming method is often funnel cake or donuts. Those are some things that are usually just kind of dropped in and float around in there, and then you skim them out. The basket method, I think pretty much everybody is familiar with. If you've ever gone to a fast food restaurant and you've seen them drop the fries down, it's one single basket. You lower it into the oil, the food cooks, and you lift it up when it's done. The double basket method is exactly like it sounds. So this is food that needs to be completely submerged for a longer period of time. An example of that could be the fried chicken breast at Cracker Barrel. So when I worked on the line at the Cracker Barrel, this is something that we did to make sure that chicken, which is raw chicken, is completely submerged, that totally gets cooked in the right amount of time. If it floats to the top, then some of it may not get cooked, and it really needs to be deep down in the oil for a longer period. So you put a basket and then the food, and then you put another basket on top, and you lower them down together. So the food does not float to the surface. Well, we used a timer, and that's how we knew. But you also can use a thermometer to check. So recovery time is, I mentioned that in, I think, the last video or the video before. So recovery time is the amount of time that an oil or a pan takes to reheat. So the more items you have in the oil, the more the recovery time is. And this is true if you think back to the lesson or lesson number 4. Sorry, I got something in my eye. So if you think back to the other lesson when we talked about overcrowding the pan for stir frying. So if you put a whole bunch of cold food is cold. So if you put a whole bunch of cold food into something, it's going to take a lot of heat out of it, and it's going to take longer for it to recover. So the less amount of cold food you put in there, the more you can regulate your heat. And so oil for deep frying is this way. If you overcrowd it with cold food, you're not going to get good results. And then smoking point, this is a concept that we've been covering in class in this unit quite a bit. And this is the point in which fats break down, the oil begins to smoke, and this is not good. So a good one for deep frying are these high temperature oils that we've been talking about in class. So peanut oil, canola oil, avocado oil are good. They have a neutral flavor. They have a really good high smoke point to get that right temperature for deep frying.